Okay, GB viewers and listeners have probably already heard of the Farage banking fiasco. My GB News colleague Nigel Farage says he's now been denied accounts by 9 separate banks. But now, laws which allow banks to close customers' accounts over their political views are expected to be ditched by the government. It's been reported that the likes of Jeremy Hunt and Kemi Badenoch are looking into changing the law, which we only adopted as an EU regulation from when we were a member of the Union. Well, joining me now is former advisor to the Bank of England, Roger Gill, with the Chief Economic Advisor to the Centre for Economic and Business Research, Vicky Price, and the Director for the Academy of Ideas, Baroness Claire Fox. Let's start with you, if we could, Roger. So a huge amount of scrutiny over people's political affiliations, having their bank accounts closed down. How did we get ourselves into this mess?
Well, I think it's a box-ticking mentality. I mean, I'm getting bombarded with tweets and other messages about conspiracy theories and banks controlling our lives. I don't think that that's it. I think we have a law here, and it's not really so much Brexit versus Remain versus Leave or EU. We had our own version of the law beforehand. It allows banks and other institutions to deal differently with people who are on this PEP, this politically exposed persons list. And I think the banks have got a real problem with crime, with fraud, with customers being hacked. And they have to be very careful. And I think many bank employees simply take the easy way out and say, well, if someone's on one of these lists, we're not going to deal with them. That's where the problem lies, I think, not with the banks and not so much with the legislation. It's the application of how they're doing it. Not only banks, but I'm coming across people involved in business transactions where large law firms, for example, find their name on this list and kill the whole transaction and walk away. My feeling is that what should be done is the legislation, the new law should say that they have to provide an explanation, and that will at least make them look into the situation rather than just tick the box. I think that's the answer.
Yeah, Vicky, and we're also seeing it's not just people such as Nigel Farage, public figures who are having their accounts closed, but kind of pressure groups, one called Our Truth. They're they question the idea of the trans ideology. They've got 2,000 members. Their account was closed. And there's a talk about Stonewall being involved in all this because Stonewall, a part of their inclusivity and diversity plan, the banks are signing up for this, seems to be evidence that Stonewall politics is affecting the type of customers who are being kicked out. Is there any merit in that?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, given that we already have a few examples of people who have absolutely nothing to do with either Stonewall or anything that they sort of preach, if you like, it suggests to me that it's a wider issue. And it's one really, when you look at the law, and it's not just here, and of course we talked about the EU, but also I looked at the US, banks can close anyone's account, and they do in the US as well, without necessarily giving an explanation. That's where I agree with Roger that perhaps we need a little bit more of an explanation of why this is happening. But there are all sorts of reasons why they could do it. It's first of all, if you don't use your account enough, if you don't, in the case of possibly Coots that we know a lot about now, if you don't have enough money in there, so if your account is a little bit inactive, if they're worried perhaps about some transactions that are happening, and the concern about sort of illegal transfers of money. So there is that as well. And it's always very difficult for anyone who's had that experience, from everything that I've read, to really understand exactly why it is in their case that they have had that account closed. But it isn't just a question of the UK or the EU. It is pretty widespread, and I think banks doing it because they have to comply with a number of regulations, particularly in terms of money laundering. And of course, we know that the UK still has the reputation of being the centre for money laundering. Anyone who tries to open an account, though, will find that it's incredibly difficult to open one at all. And yet that reputation in the UK is still pretty strong in that way.
Okay, Baroness Claire Fox, I'd like to bring you in now. I understand that you had one of your bank accounts closed for the precise same reason as Nigel Farage. Did they give you any explanation or idea as to why that happened?
Well, actually, that's the whole point that Roger has made, which is that myself and Henrik Nielsen, when we were MEPs, we set up, because we were goody two-shoes, a bank account so that all of the EU money that we got was transparent. We wanted to have a separate bank account, and because the EU, as you know, give a lot of money out for all sorts of things, there was a reasonable amount of money in there, and we were using it to fund the local office in Stockport and to put on a conference in Stockport about when we'd left the EU to be accountable. And out of nowhere, Metro Bank just closed the bank account down. And we didn't know why. And when we asked, we weren't told. In fact, they were rather rude. Henrik got a letter with no explanation. We didn't think it was political, I want to stress, at the time. We just didn't understand what had happened. And I know that there are other MEPs who face the same. And if I could just clarify something, because I actually put in a number of amendments on this very issue to the Financial Services Bill when it was passing through the Lords. There are two different things. It's like a perfect storm. There's the politically exposed person bit, the PEPs, which effectively means bank accounts are closed down with the inference somehow, which is why it's embarrassing, that maybe you're involved in money laundering or you're doing something dodgy and you're not told why. But there's another new kid on the block, which is that a lot of banks have changed their terms and conditions, and they all have these value statements now, which say that if you disagree with the values of the bank, they can close your account. And that's where some of the more contentious issues around identity politics, such as our duty being refused a bank account, or that vicar with Yorkshire Bank, who basically said 4 days after he complained about them being involved in Pride, after 70 years, he got his bank closed down. I think it's the combination of those two things, not related, which means that I disagree slightly with Roger. I do think that the law has to be changed. You've been having a campaign on a cashless society. I mean, you just cannot survive without a bank account as a citizen in the UK. You can't do it. So if your bank accounts are closed down, you're absolutely scuppered. And that's very dangerous. And it's not just well-known PEPs, people in the public eye. It could be anyone. And I just think that we need to ensure that it's seen as a vital service. They can't close down your gas because of your views or because you're politically exposed. They shouldn't be able, if you're, to close down your bank account in the same way.
OK, Roger, can I return to you now? Because it does seem to be a bitter irony indeed that the rule that got Nigel Farage closed down is an EU law. Can you explain to us the difference between the definition of a politically exposed person in a domestic sense and in the European Union's take on that, and why that's become a particular problem for people like Nigel and people like Claire Fox?
Yeah, well, the European, the EU definition is stricter than ours. But I think there's some red herrings here. I don't think it's the fact that the EU law, which we're still stuck with because the government, has not swept away all these 4,000 laws they were meant to. I don't think that's the answer. And I'm not playing leave or remain here. I'm just saying that isn't the factor. And I also don't think it's the money. I have been deluged with people who are writing to me saying things like, I have been a Coutts customer for 28 years. I have never, ever, and I don't now have £1 million in the bank account. And Nigel being refused, as he related, by 9 other banks, they clearly don't have every one of them £1 million. So I think it is the PEP thing. And I don't think it's the EU version or our version. I think it's the banks being careful and not having enough controls on people in the bank who are saying, oh, well, it's just too much trouble to deal with. Let's kick this guy out or this lady out. And some other people who are taking advantage of the situation, saying, well, I don't like this person's politics, whatever they are, left, right, center, etc. So I'm going to tick the box because who's going to tell me what for? Because there's no rules about it. That's what needs to be stopped.
Yeah, Vicky, that's a great point. Come on onto you again now, because Justin Trudeau, of course, froze out the truckers who protested against him over vaccine mandates. The ability to switch off somebody's money makes you debanked. It makes you a non-person. Do you think this is the beginning of a concerning trend, particularly as we move towards a more digital currency? There is an ability just to switch people off and make them financial non-people. And people are starting to think that this is politically motivated.
Well, it is a problem that so many people, of course, now, as we know, there's been this latest charity review of people's finances, and it seems that 13 million individuals now find it hard to pay their bills, basically cannot pay their bills, and that's a problem. And many of them, of course, would be unbanked or are falling into overdraft difficulties. And the question is, what will the banks do to them? And I do agree entirely that one needs to have an account, and you raised the issue of a cashless society. The move away from cash is an issue. We are saying that banks are doing a certain amount of decision making about individuals who they consider perhaps a little bit dangerous, but at the same time, they're closing bank branches, they're taking away ATMs. I know that the Financial Markets and Financial Services and Markets Bill has now reintroduced a law which makes, or at least introduced a law which has been signed, that at least there have to be ATMs on every high street, and if the banks all disappear, there has to be a combined service that is given to people. This move to digital currency particularly is worrying for those who are A, unbanked, and B, find it very, very difficult to live without cash.
OK, Claire Fox, final words to you briefly, if we could. How concerned are you about the march of power and control that banks have, and in particular, their ability to cancel people they just don't agree with?
Well, of course, banks are very important. They're very powerful organisations. What all that any of us care about is that they're not politicised and they don't behave in such a risk-averse way that actually ordinary people can't access their services. I think that we do live in a climate of cancel culture where it's become acceptable without explanation to just simply say you are no longer somebody we will do business with.